The summer of 1793. In the summer of 1793, France stood at a crossroads. The revolution, now in its fourth year, had transformed the nation beyond recognition. The monarchy had been overthrown, King Louis XVI executed, and a radical new republic proclaimed. Yet instead of unity, France found itself torn apart. In Paris, power had shifted into the hands of extremists. The Reign of Terror cast a long shadow. Suspected traitors, counter-revolutionaries, and anyone who opposed the new order faced the guillotine. Tens of thousands would lose their lives. At the same time, France was at war with almost all of Europe. What had begun as a conflict with the Habsburg monarchy of Austria quickly expanded. Prussia, Britain, Spain, and the Netherlands, all alarmed by the revolution's spread, joined forces against France. The young republic was surrounded by enemies, both at home and abroad. The revolt of Toulon. Nowhere was the crisis more acute than in the south. The great port city of Toulon, France's largest naval base on the Mediterranean, rebelled against the government in Paris. Toulon was no ordinary city. It was home to nearly one-third of the French Navy. Whoever controlled Toulon controlled the balance of naval power in the Mediterranean. The rebels, horrified by the excesses of Paris, did the unthinkable. They invited the British Royal Navy into the port. Admiral Lord Hood, commanding from HMS Victory, sailed in triumphantly. Without firing a shot, Britain and her allies had dealt a devastating blow to French power. It was an extraordinary coup. For the Republic, it was nothing short of a catastrophe. France's response. The government acted immediately. All available forces were ordered to Toulon. Within weeks, 19,000 French troops surrounded the rebellious port. But sheer numbers were not enough. The French army, stripped of its aristocratic officers who had fled during the revolution, lacked experienced leadership. The man in overall command, General Jean-François Carteaux, was a loyal Republican, but not a soldier. In fact, he had been a painter by trade. His lack of military training was painfully obvious. To make matters worse, his chief of artillery had been wounded, leaving a dangerous gap at the heart of the siege. The arrival of Napoleon Bonaparte. At this desperate moment, a new figure entered the story. A Corsican deputy in the National Convention, Antoine Saliceti, recommended a replacement artillery officer, a young compatriot passing through Toulon on his way to the front. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, better known as Napoleon Bonaparte. Only 24 years old, Bonaparte was ambitious and fiercely intelligent. Though he had seen little real combat, he was a professional soldier and had already begun to make a name for himself with his sharp political instincts. Saliceti, impressed by his dedication to the Republic, pressed Carteaux to give him command of the artillery. Carteaux agreed, rebuilding the artillery. When Bonaparte assumed command on September 16th, the situation was dire. The French had too few guns, too little powder, and not enough men to operate them. Many of the existing cannons were unusable. But Napoleon was relentless. He scoured the countryside for artillery, seized and used guns, trained infantrymen as gunners, and oversaw the construction of new forges and workshops. He requisitioned 100,000 sandbags from Marseille for his siege works and ensured his men had the tools to fight. By sheer willpower, he transformed the artillery into a force of 100 guns, manned by over 1,500 men. He established new forward batteries, with names drawn from the revolution itself, La Montagne and Sans-Culottes. These positions forced the Allies to pull their ships deeper into the harbor under threat of bombardment. Napoleon was not only rebuilding the artillery, he was reshaping the battle itself. A bold plan. Napoleon soon presented a daring strategy. If the French could capture Fort La Willette, overlooking Toulon's harbor, they could dominate the Allied fleet with artillery fire. Admiral Hood would have no choice but to withdraw. Carteaux approved the plan, but hesitated to commit the necessary manpower. When Napoleon urged an assault with 3,000 men, Carteaux sent just 400. The attack failed. Worse, it alerted the Allies, who immediately reinforced the position and constructed Fort Mulgrave, bristling with cannons. It was so formidable the French called it Little Gibraltar. Napoleon was furious, but he bided his time. De Gaumier takes command. By mid-November, General de Gaumier, a seasoned soldier, replaced Carteau's. De Gaumier quickly saw the value of Napoleon's plan and gave him full support. Bonaparte, now promoted to major, intensified preparations. He inspired his men with clever psychological tactics. One forward battery was so exposed that no soldier wanted to serve there. Bonaparte renamed it the Battery of Men Without Fear, and suddenly, volunteers stepped forward eagerly. It was an early example of his gift for motivating troops, a skill that would one day inspire entire armies. The Allies strike back. On November 30th, the Allies attempted to seize the initiative. British General Charles O'Hara led an attack on the French batteries. At first, it succeeded. Guns were spiked, French positions overrun. But a counterattack, led in person by de Gaumier and Bonaparte, rallied the French. The Allies were driven back. General O'Hara himself was captured, the same man who had once surrendered at Yorktown to George Washington during the American War of Independence. Now, fate had him surrender to Napoleon Bonaparte. The decisive assault. On December 18th, in driving rain and fierce winds, the French launched their decisive attack on Fort Mulgrave. The battle was brutal. The wet conditions made muskets nearly useless, turning combat into a struggle with bayonets and clubs. Bonaparte personally led the second wave, his horse shot from under him, and he himself wounded by a bayonet thrust to the thigh. The wound came within inches of killing him. But the French pressed on. Fort Mulgrave fell. Soon after, Fort L'Aiguillette and the Tour de la Balaguère were also captured. With French heavy guns in position, Toulon's harbor was no longer safe. Admiral Hood ordered an immediate evacuation. The fall of Toulon. In the chaos, Allied forces destroyed what they could. But 18 French warships, ships that might have been taken or burned, fell back into French hands, a costly mistake for Britain and Spain. As the Allies fled, 14,000 civilians from Toulon begged for rescue, terrified of Republican retribution. Many were taken aboard Allied ships, but thousands more were left behind. In the aftermath, revolutionary forces exacted brutal vengeance. For weeks, firing squads and executions ravaged the city. The fall of Toulon was both a victory and a tragedy, a triumph for the Republic, but a disaster for its enemies and for the city itself. The rise of Napoleon. For France, the victory at Toulon proved decisive. The Republic, battered on all sides, had survived one of its greatest crises. For the Allies, Toulon had been a missed opportunity to crush the revolution at its weakest point. But for Napoleon Bonaparte, Toulon was the beginning. His resourcefulness, determination, and courage during the siege earned him promotion to brigadier general. In the eyes of his superiors, he had proven himself a leader of extraordinary promise. This was the moment when a young artillery officer stepped onto the stage of history. The world would soon learn his name. Napoleon Bonaparte. The Republic had found a rising star. And for Europe, 21 years of almost constant war had just begun.